Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Russell Matthews here. If you've been staying tuned to the channel, you probably already know that there was a huge landmark vote when it comes to universal basic income in Canada, and that happened just this past weekend at the Liberal National Policy Convention, where Liberal constituents from all over the country voted in overwhelming favor of including a universal basic income as part of the party's platform. And you may also know that, unfortunately, if you're somebody who's in favor of UBI, technically these votes aren't binding and they're not forcing the Liberal Party or the government to do anything or to even work towards implementing a universal basic income. And historically, Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland, who's the finance minister of Canada, they've been rather lukewarm about the prospects of implementing something like a universal basic income. And it has me wondering, have their minds changed since this landmark vote where many of the people who support them had voiced, hey, we want you to do this? Did they change their minds? Well, that's what we're going to tackle in this video right now. We're going to cover the reaction of many different politicians, both in the current Liberal government as well as some in the Conservative Party, and we're going to get their reactions on the UBI vote and whether or not it's likely that they're going to push this forward more quickly now that this vote has actually taken place. But before we do, make sure to check out the links in the description where you can open up your own investment accounts and start taking your wealth into your own hands. And if you haven't already done so, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and to keep supporting Canadian content just like this. All right, so today we're going to start with an interview that was the first interview after this historic vote, and it was on Rosemary Barton Live. Now, this interview was with Dominic LeBlanc, who is the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. I know that's a mouthful, but essentially he's one person who would be largely involved if a universal basic income policy were to be developed by the Liberal Party. Let's hear what he has to say when he's asked about this UBI vote.
Liberals voted overwhelmingly to endorse the idea of a universal basic income. I know it's not binding. I also know the Prime Minister has said he's not really interested in it. Is this a policy the government would ever consider?
Sure. I mean, obviously we would consider any thoughtful policy proposition like that. I have a number of my colleagues in caucus who have been working for, in some cases, a number of years on what a universal basic income might look like. There's no doubt when the CERB payment started a year ago, for example, and employment insurance was expanded to gig workers, self-employed people, like the pandemic has properly taken governments to a different posture in terms of income supports. That's a good thing. I'm glad we did that. But it's a thoughtful policy. We also have premiers, Rosemary, including premiers that aren't Liberal premiers, who are saying to us that they'd be interested in looking at like a pilot project of research around what a universal basic income might look like in a smaller jurisdiction. So it's an ongoing conversation, I think a very valuable one.
Even though...
Okay, interesting. He's saying that income supports that have come out since the beginning of the pandemic, like the CERB, the CRB, the expansion of the EI program, well, that's brought this issue to the forefront. It's put UBI on the minds of so many more people because they've gotten a taste of what this could feel like, what it could look like. Now, this is a pro if you're somebody who's in support of UBI, the fact that he's saying this and how these benefits could be a precursor to something like this. But the second thing, if you're, again, in support of UBI, you may not want to hear from him is the fact that he's saying, hey, we have heard from different premiers that would be open to doing more pilot projects, more studies, take a closer look at this in a smaller scope. The fact that he as a Liberal is saying this may hint that they're not actually seriously considering implementing it, but more rather considering doing more studies and more testing to see if this is something that they later in the future want to bring into their policy.
Even though the PBO has said it could cost $85 billion if you were to do it this year, I mean, it's one thing to do that during a crisis, during a pandemic. It's another thing to build that into funding, into revenue over time.
And that's exactly the challenge, and that's why it hasn't been. If it was very easy, some previous governments would have done it. That's exactly the challenge. And how do you sort of untangle the mix of federal and provincial income supports?
That's a big point.
Obviously, if provinces have responsibility for social assistance, and you go to a universal basic income, what's the nature of their contribution to that? So that's why it's complicated, but it's certainly an idea and a policy that we think deserves a lot of consideration.
Chris, do you have
Okay, a lot of consideration. Right. So the main issue that he brings up there is the idea of federal versus provincial jurisdiction, right? Who's going to make the decisions and who's going to be responsible for what when it comes to certain programs in Canada? Now, this is an issue we see all the time here in Canada. Provinces saying, hey, no, this is something that we are supposed to be controlling. We don't want the federal government to come in and step in here, and vice versa, right? So the fact that he's bringing this fact up hints that there could be some challenges there moving forward in creating a universal basic income, because if the federal government were to step in to implement a program like this, well, maybe they'd have to bore even more costs because of the wrapping up of the welfare programs and the EI programs that may be included inside of this, with UBI being a potential replacement. Now, would all of that spending need to be done on a federal level instead of provincial now, how it currently is? These are some of the issues that they're going to face if they choose to move forward. But politicians in other political parties, well, they were a little bit less measured in their response. Recently, I believe this was just yesterday or the day before in question period, the Conservative MP, Pierre Poilievre, who is largely respected and loved by a large base of people, but just as hated by another group of people because of his hawkishness and his real ability to go right at the Prime Minister and go straight for the jugular. It seems he's very, very pointed in the way he responds to things. Well, he actually brought up the point that inside of Justin Trudeau's mandate letter to Chrystia Freeland, the letter that he sends to all of his ministers saying, hey, this is what I expect from you right now, this is what I want you to do. Inside of that letter that Justin Trudeau penned to Chrystia Freeland, he said, I don't want to see any more added long-term spending. Now, UBI would certainly fall into the category of long-term added spending. And Pierre Poilievre is quick to bring this up, both in reference to UBI as well as any additional spending that might be included in the upcoming budget that's on Monday, April 19th. Again, we're going to do a live stream of that here on the channel, so mark your calendars. But let's listen into what Pierre has to say.
The Prime Minister's letter said, you will avoid creating new permanent spending. Again, you will avoid creating new permanent spending. That's necessary because Canada is currently on trajectory for a massive debt crisis if we continue to borrow at this rate. So yes or no, will the Finance Minister honor the Prime Minister's written word to introduce no new permanent spending?
So you can see this Conservative MP pushing really hard against the potential of spending more in the long term. Now let's hear what the secretary for Chrystia Freeland, the person who's in the House of Commons when she's not as her replacement, let's hear what their response is to this criticism.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure the honourable member opposite that when we move forward with the budget next week, he will see decisions that will both support Canadians during their time of emergency and set the course for a recovery that will ensure that Canada will prosper years from now. I can reassure him that all of the investments that will be contained in that budget will be fiscally sound and will be supporting the best interests of the Canadian in both the short term and the long term. In the meantime, I would encourage the Conservatives to get with the program and begin to recognize that the smart thing to do in a time of emergency can be to invest to support Canadians in their time of need.
So in this response, there's no denial that there could be some more long-term spending added as of this budget. Now, what that would look like, we don't know yet because, again, the budget hasn't come out yet. It's looking more and more like there won't be many components of UBI included in this budget because of the lukewarm responses we're going to hear from the Prime Minister just in a moment. But he also does bring up the fact that he says, hey, what we're putting forward in the budget, this long-term spending that we're looking to do to support Canadians, it will be fiscally sound. Now, you might be wondering, how can they continue to spend so much more money than Canada makes and they still call it fiscally sound? Well, the way that they do this is they actually look at how cheap it is to finance their huge amounts of debt right now. Because we have super low interest rates right now here in Canada, well, the government's debt costs, the amount they have to pay regularly to service or to pay for the debt that they have, well, that's gone way down because interest rates have gone down. Now, this is what Chrystia Freeland used in her fall economic update to sort of explain why her spending was so high and how that was actually economically feasible. Now, the question remains, what happens when interest rates go up? But that's a topic for a different video. But finally, we need to hear from the Prime Minister himself. What does he think of this vote that just went through, given the fact that he wasn't super huge on UBI in the first place? He had actually said a little while ago that the Liberal Party doesn't see any route forward for universal basic income as of right now. That's what he said a little while ago. Again, I'm paraphrasing, but let's listen into his response to a question that was asked just a couple of days ago.
And Prime Minister, this weekend your party overwhelmingly endorsed the idea of implementing a universal basic income. Today you're meeting with the leaders of the NDP and the Green parties, who also both strongly support that idea. You seem less enthusiastic yourself. Can you clarify your position on this? And as you bring in the federal budget, are you going to take the first steps, or is it something you're going to push off to your next mandate?
I know people are eager to find out what's in the budget, but they're going to have to wait until next Monday for us to put forward an ambitious budget for this country that is going to be focused on jobs and growth and building back better, even as we get through these hopefully final stages of the pandemic. I was incredibly pleased to see Liberals gathering virtually from across the country to talk about what building back better looks like, how we can create good jobs and growth, protect the environment, and support the most vulnerable around the country that we've seen have been particularly hard hit by the pandemic. The Liberal Party conventions have been a source of ideas and initiatives that often have made it into platforms and into policy by the Liberal government. I can think of same-sex marriage. I can think of a range of issues that have been brought forward, and we will continue to listen to the grassroots and value their encouragements to continue pursuing various policy options. The things that we've done for the most vulnerable Canadians, whether it's been supporting the middle class and people working hard to join it with things like the Canada Child Benefit, support for seniors by increasing the guaranteed income supplement, reducing taxes on the middle class and raising them the wealthiest 1%, are all things designed to make sure that everyone has a real and fair shot to succeed. And that's exactly what we're going to continue to work on as a party.
Okay, so as you can probably tell, it's a little bit of a roundabout answer. It's something that you see from many politicians a lot of the time, where they don't really want to give their full views on something, because if you give your full views on something too early, it gives you less flexibility to pivot in your policy if you decide that's something you want to do down the road. So here he's not coming out and saying that he's outright in support of UBI, but he's also not coming out and saying that he's not in support of it. Again, hinting the fact that many times in the past, when there have been these policy votes at the Liberal conventions, a lot of the time, like you said, with same-sex marriage and many other policies, it'll allow that to sort of seep into the platform for the next election. Now, my thoughts here are, if the Liberal government is to incorporate a UBI, it would likely be something that they could include in their campaign if they decide to in this next election, which we're probably expecting to see within the next 6 months. At least it's looking like that right now. But then he goes on to bring up something that it seems like the Liberal government is focusing on more than they are UBI, and that is families and children. Now, he sort of applauds himself and the Liberal Party for creating the Canada Child Benefit, where parents can receive some extra money each year because it's expensive to be a parent, is the thought behind it. Now, he emphasizes this, and this is right in line with what we're actually expecting to see in the upcoming budget, which is some sort of national childcare plan. Chrystia Freeland hinted at this very, very heavily in one of her latest press conferences, her talk during that Liberal policy convention. It really seems like that's going to be a huge, huge part of this budget. Now, whether or not that's where the Liberal Party actually wants to go in the future with their policies, well, that remains to be seen. We're going to have to wait and see how slowly or how quickly UBI works its way into the Liberal framework, and whether or not they're actually going to even bring it up when the budget comes out on Monday. But what's going to happen going forward? Well, we're going to have to wait and see, and we're going to have to wait to find out. But it does bring up the question, is this just something that the Liberal government is going to promise and talk about and give a whole bunch of lip service and then not really execute on? Like, I think back to the previous election where they were campaigning largely on electoral reform. I believe that was for Trudeau's first election that he won. He said he was going to change the way that elections were run so that we could have a more fair election system. Now, he went back on that after really campaigning on it. So it makes you wonder about what things are the Liberal Party going to actually execute on and which ones just sound good to voters. This is something you got to be thinking about for all of these different parties, whether or not they're actually going to execute the things that you want them to do. And again, I like to emphasize here on this channel, especially when it gets into a topic as divisive as this, is that right now I am trying to stay in the middle as much as possible when it comes to this. Whether you hate UBI, you think it's the worst possible step for Canada, or if you you think that this is the best idea ever, you're welcome here on this channel. We like to just bring the information here to you so you can make up your own mind, and I try to do it in as unbiased a way as possible. And call me out if you ever feel like I'm leaning too far on one side, because I really want to stay in the middle, because I think that's valuable for Canadians. And with that said, I'm really curious as to what you think about all of this. Do you think that UBI is a great idea, but potentially the Liberals aren't the right people to do it? Or do you think that it could bankrupt Canada as a country? There are lots of extreme views on this. I want to hear them all down there in the comments. I read them all, and I try to reply to a bunch of them. And if you haven't already done so, check out the links in the description where you can open up your own investing accounts and take your wealth into your own hands. And of course, subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell. If you hit that notification bell, you'll be notified when we go live on Monday, when they actually reveal this budget and reveal the future of Canada. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that. And with all that said, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I really hope this video has helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time. This channel is supported by viewers like you. Thanks, channel members.